If you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else. So I always think there's a trade-off with everything.
Red dots are gonna look fuzzy. They're gonna have glare, things of that nature. It's not meant to look like a crisp dot, but like that's what you're giving up. It's supposed to be omnipresent no matter what what focal length your eye is at. It's not meant to look perfectly clean like what folks are looking at in the store. When you're in the store and you're really looking at the dot, like that's the last time if you're using it right, you should be looking at the dot.
How's it going, everybody? We are going to talk to you today a little bit about AR-15s and the optics that go on top of them. It is Jimmy on the mic here, not joined by my esteemed colleague, Mark. I think that he heard that we were talking about AR-15s, and he booked. Just kidding. He actually had something going on at home, and full disclosure, this is actually our second take at this. When it comes to ARs and the optics that can go on them, the thing is you're talking about one of the most versatile firearm platforms ever created, and just a slew of different optics that can go on them. I mean, really, you can put anything on an AR, or you can probably build an AR, find an application that an AR is suitable in, especially when you start factoring in AR-10s and whatnot, that they can be perfectly viable in. So the sky's kind of the limit. And I'm joined across the table by Reuben and Adam Maxwell, who are some of our in-house AR and all things related experts. And so what do you guys think? I've kind of alluded to the fact that ARs can be used for darn near anything out there. When it comes to somebody getting one and they think, okay, what optic should I put on top? I know the answer already is going to be it depends, because those are the questions we like to ask around here.
Or Vortex, one of those two. Well,
yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
Vortex first, then it depends.
It depends which Vortex.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. We'll combine it into one to make it easy. So, yeah, it depends, but I'd say a few of the really popular ones that we'll go into a little bit here today would be red dots, prism scopes, low power variables. You see those most often. That's not to say that a high-powered optic of some sort, like a 3-9, 4-16, 5-25, who knows, couldn't go on an AR. Again, it just depends. But what sort of uses out there do you see people using ARs in the most, and how do you begin to steer them towards something?
I think what strikes me about it from when I was in retail is the sale of an AR-15. If we were to break it down, it was usually like an hour and a half conversation of which one should I get. And then the optic conversation was like a 5-minute, all right, let's wrap this up and it's time to go. But really you could go, as we're about to go pretty deep in the weeds on any of this stuff. And it always, the optics always seem to be a little bit brushed over. You can read volumes about the evolution of the AR-15 from M16 to current, just in military usage. You can't find very much about the optics. I know because I looked. But I think if you were to that put it optically in a few buckets, you got the longer range folks, the longer range, the predator hunting, kind of that intermediate 3 to 600 yard crowd. You got the low power variables, and then you have the fixed prism scopes and red dots, or I'm gonna jump
holographics and red dots.
Holographics and red dots, but you kind of got the low power variable scopes, and then you got the reflexive sights, or the projected image sights, where we're more working in close range, and we want the parallax free and the no scope shadow type.
A lot of the times when people talk about that, and when they ask that question, they say, "Hey, I bought an AR. What kind of optic should I get?"
Yeah,
I know you kind of said well, it depends, but with how different and how varied and how many different types of AR platform rifles there are out there, you might as well have just said, I bought a rifle. What kind of optics should I get? right? Like that's the number. There's probably as many options within an AR based on the receiver size. Like, is it an AR-10 or is it an AR-15? What's your barrel length? What's your chambering? What cartridge do you shoot? Do you have a collapsible stock or do you have a fixed stock? So I mean, like saying I bought an AR, what kind of optic should I get? It doesn't usually do very much. So that question then comes: what do you plan to do with it? What's your application? What do you need it to? What do you need this optic? Almost like, what aspect of this gun or what quality of this gun do you need your optic to unleash? And if you can answer that question, well, speed up close. Okay, let's talk dots. I need to be able to shoot up close with the speed of a dot and the accuracy of or the precision of a longer range scope, higher mag scope. It's like, okay, low power variable. I'm shooting a PRS gas gun match. Well, then a low power variable or a red dot doesn't do you very much good. We're going to look at a rifle scope like a 3-15 or a 5-25 or something. So, yeah, it's so much as you want to be able to say these optics are AR optics and these aren't. There's just not really a way to answer that question without a little more information.
Yeah. And would you even say that, I don't exactly know even how to articulate this, but would you say that when it comes to buying ARs, that a lot of times if somebody's asking the question, what type of optic, and they don't even necessarily have a clue where to start yet, is it safe to say that a lot of times in those cases, maybe they didn't even have necessarily a clue as to what they were going to use the AR for when they got it? Because
that can happen.
I think that there's probably a lot of people who get swayed into buying a certain given AR because, and nowadays it's no secret that in 2020 a lot of people probably just went out and bought ARs because they felt they wanted the receiver, or they wanted something where suddenly they felt they needed a means to defend themselves, whatever, or they decided it was time to get into firearms.
Yeah.
And so they went out and got whatever was the most common thing that most other people are getting, which is probably something with a collapsible buttstock, a 16-inch barrel, and some basic furniture on it. But they don't necessarily know what that's going to be for. Like if you go out and you build one or you buy one and you know what it's going to be for. Like if I go to, and I just build out the parts list for some 10.5-inch gun that I want to be my home defense gun, and I don't care.
Go to Brownells and pick everything except the gas tube like Mark.
Exactly. But if I don't even... I'm building that gun, and I don't even care if I go out to an outdoor range and it's not that effective for me personally beyond 200 yards, then I'm probably not going to go in with the questions like, what optic in general should I get? It might be more like, what red dot should I get? Because I know I'm going to be more close quarters or something like that.
Like on the sales side, I think you got to start asking people questions, and as they answer questions, we can wiggle down which hole they need to be in. So, like, did you buy a rifle or did you buy a carbine? So did you buy a full length rifle and you want to do rifle things with it, or did you buy a short carbine? And then if you bought a rifle, did you buy a general purpose rifle or did you buy a long range rifle?
And if you bought a carbine, then you and Adam can be friends, especially if it's a short one.
Right. Well, if you bought a carbine, did you buy a general use carbine, or did you buy a PDW? Like, are you trying to buy something really? You can start to get bracketed into what did you buy it for? What was the idea you had in your head when you bought it? And that's going to help us kind of select, the short list of things for you to consider. Because it's kind of like the world of ARs. It's like, well, I want to buy an AR. Here's all the ones. Whereas it was like, well, if we ask some questions, now we can narrow it down to, well, here's 3 you should consider. And it's kind of the same thing with optics. So
for sure. And one thing that I think people run into as well is maybe even somebody has an idea of what optic they kind of want to use, but the internet is telling them that it's wrong, right?
Yeah.
So, like, a couple of examples would be, I want to have an 11.5-inch gun with a 1-6 or even a 1-10 on top. But the internet says that there's no point in that. It's useless. An 11.5-inch gun is to a red dot as Ferraris are to red or something, or that's one thing we did in our first iteration.
It's happening again.
It's happening again. A lot of car references, but this time I started it. Last time I didn't, I promise. Or you get a 20 or let's say an 18-inch gun, and everybody's now saying, well,
you can't put a red dot on that.
You can't put a red dot. You can't put a fixed 1X prism on that. It's why? Why would you do that? You can't. And then it makes someone nervous. They start second guessing. Well, maybe I got an 18-inch gun, but I wanted to put the fixed 1X on it.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to dispel that.
Well, yeah, there's applications for all that. I think the biggest one is like, well, you wouldn't put a red dot on a Barrett 50 cal, would you?
Wait,
we did.
we did it.
Yeah, well, they do it all the time for shooting out of helicopters. So like, there's an application.
That's what we were using it for.
For every niche thing.
We knew about that.
Yeah, we were just testing. So like, and then the same thing, like, well, no one would ever put a variable power scope on an SBR. Well, I do, because there's applications for it, in the niche sport of 3-gun that I was playing. So there was always an exception to the rule, but I think what folks are trying to steer other folks away from when they're doing that is there's a reason that a lot of people made similar choices, and if you're making a choice that's against the grain, there's probably a reason. It's kind of like, well, why hasn't anyone ever built the AR-15 that you want to build? There might be a reason that all these AR-15 companies don't think that that's a viable model.
Yeah, and when you bring that up, I can relate to that and all the requests we've gotten, even for optics too.
Yeah.
Why don't you guys make this? It would sell like hotcakes. Well, maybe you would buy 2, but other people might not.
Yeah. A very prominent industry professional texts me every week asking for a Razor Scout scope.
How about that?
How about you won't give it up? But I'm like, dude, I mean, it would be cool for you and your 10 friends.
Yeah.
But
I'm sure they would love it. It would be extremely high quality, and it would do what they exactly want.
Yep.
But not exactly what a majority of other people
Yeah.
want
It
to
would
justify all the cost and development and tooling that would go into making it.
Exactly.
Okay. So we have, again, we kind of listed out some of the categories here. Now, on the table in front of us, we got a couple of Adams guns here, and they are clear. And when they're clear, they're clear. It's funny how that works.
Yeah.
It's a stick.
They're good, yeah. Anyway, but we have a couple Adams guns on the table, and we also have a few optics in front of us. Now, you'll notice that even though we mentioned at the beginning, you can basically, any AR can be built up to then be a perfect tool for an application that would require any optic pretty much, but we don't have the higher powered stuff on the table. We're more sticking with the most common optics that we see put on most general purpose ARs, which is red dots, which can come in many different shapes and sizes. Red dots with a magnifier. We have a magnifier sitting here as well. Prism optics, and your low power variables being scopes that are traditional rifle scopes that start on a true 1 power and then go to some other power like 4, 6, 8, or 10. If we were to go through each one of these categories, which we will, we'll list off some of the pros and cons and perfect use case scenarios and our opinions for these styles of optics. What do you guys think about that? Is that a good way to start?
It sounds great.
All right, cool. Rube, do you want to start with your last call again, like we did last time?
I forgot what it was.
It's all right.
I didn't even get a last call last time, so I hope we do it this time.
Oh, that's right. Sorry.
It was 2 hours in.
Yes,
so.
Thank you. MC Ryan's over there waving at me. We will also be showing some new products as well in this one.
That's right.
So if by the time you're listening to this, you haven't heard of a bunch of new Vortex products, or if we're right on the cusp of it, then definitely stay tuned for that. Thank you, MC Ryan.
It's kind of like Where's Waldo?
It is.
Like they're around, but you have to spot them.
Yeah, you just can't spot them yet.
Right. Or can you?
All right. What do you guys want to start with? What's the best way to start? Do you start with what, in my opinion, would be more, and we'll get into this, special purpose optics that are more focused on one particular style of application, like your red dots and your prism optics? Or do you start with the ones that are more of your jack of all trades, low power variables?
I think we go with what most people would feel is the most common type of optic, which is probably the 1 power optics.
Yeah.
So your dots and your prisms and your hollows.
Let's do it then. Well, let's start with red dots. And red dots come in so many different shapes and sizes. like I mentioned before. You've got open top ones that are just as small can get.
Yeah, something like you might find on a slide on a Glock 17 MOS.
Exactly. Can still go on an AR. You've got your more, I would call probably the most prolific and most common sized red dot, which would be whether it's a Crossfire Red Dot here or one of the new ones that we're going to pull out in a second. But it's still really small, but it's a fully encased housing with the aluminum going all the way around. It's not open top like these other little guys. And then you even have larger ones than that, but they're still essentially 1X red dots. And some of that is which one you choose may be application-based or personal preference-based. But in the end, they are all red dots. They do function the same, with an LED emitter shooting out light, which reflects back to your eye and just gives you a simple red dot in your field of view to use as a point of aim. So what do you guys think is awesome about red dots, and what are some things where if somebody was looking to get a red dot, you'd want to make sure they at least knew this going in? Because as we know with optics, there's always trade-offs.
I think maybe this time we could start it off in the idea of a red dot is we're replacing an iron sight system. We're trying to put a more intuitive system for your eye to use for shooting targets that don't require enhancement to hit.
And taking away alignment, taking away what a sight picture is.
Yep, we're taking away sight alignment. We're taking away multiple focal planes for your eye and putting essentially a system that's simpler to use on a rifle that otherwise you would use iron sights for. Right. Now, people have a wide breadth of capabilities with iron sights, depending how dedicated they are to the system.
Sure.
But generally speaking, that's what we're looking at in comparison to like a scope. A scope, we're actually trying to enhance the image a little bit so that we can pick a point to hit.
Yeah, have a higher level of precision, which we're not trying to do with a red dot unless we put a magnifier behind it. But two things on red dots I think that are important, and I think that are probably a big part of people's decision-making process when they're selecting an optic for an AR. If you were to buy an AR from the store today, there's a good chance that it doesn't have iron sights on it. It doesn't have any type of sighting system. And so people are looking to get something on there that will allow them to at least use it.
Right.
And a red dot, like Adam said, takes the place of irons. It's a one-power optic. It has the same magnification level as your eye does. And so there's two things. The cost. Red dots are typically pretty cost. They're not high cost. Right, you can spend money on a dot. You can go up to a premium price on a dot, but a lot of times when people are buying a rifle, a dot is a very simple option because it's like it comes with a mount mostly. Most of the time, it's a couple $100 to we'll call it like $150 to $500 would unleash most of the dots on the market for you. Yep. And the other thing too is the footprint, so size and weight on the gun. They leave a lot of real estate available to do other, whether you want to put a set of flip-up irons, you want to run a laser, you want to put a flashlight on it. I don't know what all. There's some pretty crazy things you can mount to a Picatinny rail. So a dot typically will leave you with a lot of room left on your rail.
Mm-hmm. I would say like on a pro and con base, like I'm choosing a dot on a gun that I'm trying to shave bulk off of.
Sure.
So if I'm going to do something that I know I don't need a scope for, like I'm kind of past the point where I want to prove that a scope can do certain things. I've proved that to myself. But if I'm going if you're going to take your typical carbine class, tactical carbine shooting class, your CQB class, your vehicle class, those kind of classes, those aren't rifle shooting classes. But I'm going to spend a lot of time with this rifle hanging on or around my body. So a red dot shaves that bulk off of it. So generally speaking, when I'm looking to a red dot in my systems, it's a system that I'm trying to shave bulk off of because I've kind of decided that there's some fairly reasonable parameters around where the targets are going to be for that.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and you guys brought up an excellent point there when you were talking about the fact that they've essentially nowadays replaced the iron sight. Now, a lot of people get mad when you say stuff like that because they say, well, I qualified in XYZ with iron sights. I can shoot them out to this distance. I'm really good with them. And that's awesome. I think it's kind of a lost art being really good with iron sights. But the thing is, most people who are really good with iron sights, they spent tons and tons and time and repetition and lots of ammo and to get that good. Whereas I'm not going to say somebody would all of a sudden just like get a red dot and be as good as them right out of the box, but
just because you walked uphill both ways in 2 feet of snow doesn't mean you shouldn't drive your car now.
Yeah.
I mean, I learned how to drive
car
stick shift, a manual transmission, and it's not really relevant to basic transportation today.
Okay, that one doesn't apply. That was stupid. We're gonna carry on. Anyway.
Do you want to keep going? We need to know.
No. Let's not do the bad analogies thing again.
I was talking about semis. So
okay. Well, anyway, though, so yeah, red dots, they're very intuitive. They're quick. You can set them up so easily. And then, like we mentioned as well, they come in so many different shapes and sizes. You can have the one where it's open top. Maybe you give up a little bit of inherent durability because we've stripped away so much material. But there's nothing in your field of view practically besides that red dot. You can just use it both eyes open. It's really tiny. It doesn't take up much space. Fits in a briefcase for all your clandestine operations really well.
It's
or more
likely
likely
as possible.
Or more likely today you're shooting like USPSA PCC, right? And like your make ready is taking the gun out of a soft padded case.
Yeah.
So durability isn't necessarily your main focus. Your main focus is transition speed and target acquisition speed, right? It's not having that inhibited field of view. It's having just a dot floating out in the middle of space so that I can shoot the target.
Right. Mm-hmm. Then you got your next size up, which, like we said, our Crossfire Red Dot here this is kind of the most popular size. We'll even intro that new one, which is the SPARC Solar. Very exciting.
I'm so excited about this.
Oh, yeah, look at that. It has been. There you go. There's your Where's Waldo.
Where's
it has
Waldo
been
right
in
there.
plain sight this entire time. Dots like this, though, very common bolt pattern and mounting pattern size. They mount on all kinds of things. There's a ton of aftermarket support for them. You can direct mount them to a lot of rails and other devices, it seems these days. Extremely efficient. Ones like this now, the SPARC Solar, have a solar panel on top that actually runs the optic. So it's essentially assisting the battery. It makes your battery life go for literally hundreds of thousands of hours. I mean,
long time.
Yeah, long time, to the point where your battery is actually going to be the limiting factor, not the efficiency of the optic. But you have things like this, and then you've got even your larger red dots like your Strike-Fire 2s.
Oh, yeah, SPARC AR, which for a long time has been kind of a staple in our line. Before that, SPARC 2. So, yeah, there's footprint similarities there with all those. And, I think they're incredibly rugged just by design. Mm-hmm. They have a full housing around them, a full aluminum housing. One of the only downsides to something like that would be just your apparent field of view, the size of the aperture that you're looking through.
Right, which you can kind of fix by going to something like that, Strike-Fire 2, a little bit bigger red dot. But then you just have a bigger red dot on your gun.
Right. Yep.
And so, some of that sort of, we'll get into the UH-1 here in a little bit, or holographic sights. But
the compromises that were made and kind of the blend of apparent field of view for size is what has me really excited about the SPARC Solar in general. That's why I'm excited to get it on a lot of our systems, a lot of our dealers. I mean, we're all ramped up to push it to a lot of our LE customers. It's another red dot, but I mean, it's hard to get me excited about a red dot. It's pretty exciting product.
Because in that optics case, for being a small-sized red dot, it still actually manages to have this like pretty big field of view through the actual optic itself, and also a very uncluttered aluminum housing around said field of view. So you really just don't end up with a lot of stuff in front of your eye, which is always ideal when you're trying to move fast and be accurate and quick. So let's talk about some of the cons of going with a red dot as well. So right off the bat, I think if I'm going to go off some of the ones that I've heard out there. Some people bring up the astigmatism argument. Oh, I can't see a red dot very well because I have an astigmatism. We can jump into that. Obviously, once you get a red dot, if you want to then shoot out to more intermediate distances and be more accurate and you're going to have to go to something like a magnifier, so you have to get a second optic, and even then, still you might be limited to still only 3 power or maybe 5 power, depending on the magnifier. And then,
they're electronic. I mean, it's an electronic device, so there are people that will guide you away from it simply because it could fail. Right.
And in a Red Dot's case, if the battery died or something like that happened, you're left with no point of aim because you don't have a physical reticle inside of it like you do in other optics.
To expand a little bit on your astigmatism, kind of like that downside. I mean, that's like, for those of you who don't know, an astigmatism is a condition where your eye is more egg-shaped and doesn't reflect light how it should. So you can see, a starburst, or you can see a cluster of dots, right? You can see a comet.
It's one of those,
a comet or a comma, depending on who you are. So
it's one of those. There's no perfection in nature. So it's not like a disease where it's like you have it or you don't. Everyone has it to some extent. It's just that some people have it wicked bad, and other people don't.
So an astigmatism with a red dot, that's the condition where you might pull an optic up and look through it, and you might not see a clear dot, and that can be really tough too, especially if you're trying to be any type of precise with it. It can be distracting, but it can also just be completely prohibitive of you using that type of sighting system. So that's one thing. The other thing just being that you're operating without a magnifier, you're operating on 1 power, and the level of information that you get through that optic, having no magnification there to assist you in, whether you're a law enforcement professional and you're concerned with PID, whether you're a competition shooter and you're looking at, am I hitting on the target where I want to hit? A dot doesn't provide you with a ton of information beyond what you have with the naked eye. So, that's another thing.
Absolutely. That's kind of red dots. And then, like we mentioned as well, there is the holographic sights, which we bundle in with the red dots because in general, they serve the same purpose, being something that is, this. It's weird calling it 1 power because it makes it seem
non-magnified,
right?
Right,
non-magnified. Yeah.
Presenting in a different way.
Exactly. And so similar in application, something you use for ideally close quarters, fast action shooting. But the holographic side, of course, there's different technology inside. Rather than an LED reflecting off of a parabolic lens like a red dot uses, we have essentially a holographic system inside that's a laser reflecting off some mirrors, and there's beam splitters. There's a thing called a wafer in there, and basically you end up with this reticle inside. It can be a little bit more technical reticle than just your regular dot.
You can design it. Design whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. But those are pretty unique in that, they don't have any image distortion when you look through them. You can get this nice big field of view with 0 image distortion whatsoever. Even in red dots, since there is that one lens in there is some image distortion.
Yeah. And sometimes people who have an astigmatism will see the reticle in a holographic sight more clearly. Or less distorted than they would see a red dot. And so sometimes that decision for people is as simple as looking through both optics and seeing which one their eye likes. And like, not to oversimplify the choice for the customer, but there is some simplicity to that. Even looking, my decision between a prism, 1X prism, a holographic, and a red dot, that decision can be as simple. And it doesn't need to be, but it can be as simple as which one do you like looking through best.
And that's a real thing. Yeah. Because it, like, I've had this happen many times. I go down to the showroom. I'm looking through different red dots. All of them are Vortex red dots. They all technically, in terms of how they function the same. But there are some, when I pull up to my eye, I'm like, yeah, that one looks good.
Yeah.
And it's funny because then, I'll pull another one up and I'm like, something about this one. Somebody else pulls the same one up and they're like, no, this one's my favorite.
Yep.
And it's all different. Like, I love looking through the Razor Red Dot for some reason because the dot is the absolute most crisp I have ever seen a dot in a red dot ever.
It's not that way for everyone.
When I look through the Razor Red Dot. And then somebody else will pick it up and they're like, man, my astigmatism really screws with this one. but a different one works better for them.
That's one of those things that
yeah.
When we came out and we had like at one point in time we had like the SPARC 2 and we had a SPARC AR and we had a Crossfire that had just come out and looking, people would look through the Crossfire and some people would say, well, I like this one because the dot's just so much cleaner. And then someone else would say the same thing about the SPARC 2. And then when you would tell them that the price on the Crossfire was lower, it was like almost like a short circuit happened. It was like, but that one looks better.
Right.
And you have to kind of explain, but it doesn't look better for everyone because everyone's eye is going to see that reflection of an LED through through an emitter differently.
Right. You bring up a good point, too, around like one costing more or less. There are some different features that you can get around a red dot. Even though they're a very simple optic, there are some different things that can be sort of added around them. So your most simple and basic style of a red dot would be something like the Crossfire Red Dot, which, as you mentioned, is kind of more of our entry-level red dot. That's not because it's like a low-quality red dot. It's just because it's an LED with a parabolic lens, an aluminum housing around it, and a diode switch on the side.
Very simple.
Not much to it.
Not a whole lot to it.
There's no buttons. It's just just an analog dial.
Exactly.
Right? So
now, the SPARC Solar here, which is going to go for somewhere around, I want to say $100 to $150 more. Maybe I'm off on that.
Yep. No, you're right. It's around $300.
Is, now you're adding in the solar panel. You've got these flush adjustments here for the elevation and windage, which then cut off a little bit of bulk. Different battery cap as well, which is also a little bit more streamlined. You've got button switches on the side, so a digital switch instead of a rotary switch. Bigger sort of field of view, so a different erector unit in there.
There's a more robust mount too, as well.
Yep.
It has a steel insert that clamps onto the Picatinny and a little bit higher quality screws. And overall, that optic just has a little more technology into it. It's solar assisted, so that the site has to decide when it's going to utilize solar instead of the battery power.
Right.
Right.
And you don't decide that. The site does, and so you don't have to ever.
And it's not, don't think of it as an onboard charger. Think of it as solar assisting, right? So, yeah, the site, and the cost difference is reflective of, not, red dot pun. The cost difference is reflective of all that additional technology.
For sure. So, yeah, determine what you really want / need.
One of my kind of closing thoughts on red dots is that and maybe this would be better as a last call, but when you say yes to something, Joe told me this, you say no to something else.
That's true.
And so when you're looking at, well, I really want this thing to be fast, or I really want this to be durable, or I really want the battery life, if you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else. So I always think there's a trade-off with everything.
Yep. For sure. For sure.
And to piggyback on that with like the astigmatisms and whatnot as well, the trade-off for no, unlimited eye relief, parallax free, all the characteristics that make red dots what they are. The trade-off to that is astigmatisms, but also to the greater extent, like red dots are gonna look fuzzy. They're gonna have glare, things of that nature. It's not meant to look like a crisp dot. We'll get to the thing that has the crisp dot here in a minute, but like that's what you're giving up. It's supposed to be omnipresent no matter what what focal length your eye is at. It's not meant to look perfectly clean like what folks are looking at in the store. When you're in the store and you're really looking at the dot, like that's the last time if you're using it right, you should be looking at the dot. It's not a front sight like on an iris-sighted pistol.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point to bring up, for sure. As we mentioned, of course, they can work in conjunction with a magnifier. Now, I think we'll get into the magnifier thing when we get into some of the low power variables or some of the Prism sites here, because then you start talking about bringing in magnification to try and make yourself a little bit more accurate at distance. I know, Adam, you have some thoughts around the magnifier, but funny enough, speaking of magnifiers, though, and moving into Prism sites, magnifiers and Prism sites really actually the same optical system. A Prism sight is really just a magnifier, but with a reticle inside and a mounting solution to be used as the primary sighting device. And so let's talk about Prism sights. I feel like they're kind of the old middle ground between a red dot and a low power variable. because you could look at one like the Spitfire AR here that's on the table, and you'd see, generally speaking, in terms of size and perceived weight, if you're just looking at it, it's similar to a red dot. But we have an etched reticle inside, like a more traditional rifle scope or a low power variable would have. Where
I think
we can
red
get
dots
magnification.
I think red dots have kind of adopted Prism sights into their family. At least the one powers.
The one powers, yeah.
We put them in that part of our website.
It's kind of like part of the. It's kind of like part of it. Like it likes to hang out with that group, but then like its older brothers, like they also like the magnification, so they think they're a rifle scope.
Yeah. Yeah, that. I'm following.
Yeah.
Ish, kind of.
Yeah, like it's kind of part of that family, but it's kind of not. It likes to go over to that family's house and party.
It does.
Yeah.
Going with a Prism sight, though. So, again, we'll talk pros and cons. There are some things that you gain, and there are some things that you lose over a red dot. Now, let's talk about that 1X one, for example, just off the bat. Now, the Spitfire AR 1X, you gain a different, more technical reticle inside. It's an etched reticle, so we can do a lot more things with it. It's also not going to have any issue with somebody with a severe astigmatism.
It always looks clean.
It always looks clean because you're looking at a reticle. You're not looking at a reflection of light.
It's always there.
Always there. So regardless of whether or not the battery is powered, if the battery dies or you don't even have a battery in there, there is a reticle there. So also a good point. And
Truth be told, I usually don't have a battery in mine.
Right.
I usually just use the black reticle.
Yeah, I mean, some of the downsides, right? Like we kind of listed some of the similarities. A couple of downsides would be, mounting solutions. While it does share a very common type of mount, you're limited to a singular mounting height on the one power. You have limited eye relief, right?
Yep.
It has eye relief much like a rifle scope instead of eye relief would be unlimited like in a red dot, and then field of view limitations. Now you can adjust your diopter so that you see a fairly flat field of view. However, you do have through the scope eye relief or field of view that would be measurable.
Yeah. There's always something, and it's indescribable, and once you know, once you've seen through both, there's something about when you look through a red dot or a holographic sight, which again is one of those unmagnified optics, you're seeing the target. When you see the target through that optic, it is what it is. You're seeing the exact same thing that your open left eye, in my case of being a right eye dominant shooter, is seeing. They're seeing the same thing. There's just a reticle in the way of the right eye that you can place over whatever you're trying to hit. When you're using an optic, whether it's a low power variable on one power or a fixed 1X Prism optic, you're seeing something different. You're seeing an image that's been delivered to you via an optical system and is now sitting at a very predetermined point out in front of your eye, and that's your eye relief. And so that's what your right eye, again, in my case, if you're left eye dominant, it's your left eye. That's what your right eye sees, and then your left eye sees like it normally would. So even though you're seeing a 1X image, and even though it can be used very fast, there is something different, and you can't put your finger on it or explain it to somebody. They just have to see it.
I mean, that's why I said it likes to party with rifle scopes and red dots. I mean, it has attributes similar to both.
All of our optics like to party. Just depends on which ones they like to party with.
And then within Prism scopes, you have other magnification options too, right?
That's right. Let's bring these bad boys out. Another new product for this time period. If you're listening, right as this is coming out, you're going to be seeing these here either pretty soon or maybe you've already caught a glimpse. But Spitfire Gen II, like you said. So now you can bring in some other magnifications.
Yeah. Very, very capable optics. Prism sights have been around for a while. In fact, a lot of years. We might have not necessarily called them that, but fixed power, in the industry, fixed power battle sights, I guess you would kind of label them as.
Yep.
Companies have kind of used that term as to describe a fixed power optic with a reticle and potentially illumination, to be a very simple sighting system.
Right. It is about as simple as it gets, because as you graduate to something like a low power variable, which isn't, I'm not going to say it's complicated, it's easy to learn, but there are a few more learning curves. Like, for example, changing magnifications around, deciding what magnification I will use for, if you're talking about competition, what magnification would be on at this stage, at which point, or if it sits by my bedside, what magnification do I have it on? Was I just using it at the range where I had it on 6, but now I want it on 1? I'm going to want to make sure to set it to 1 before I put it in the safe or whatever.
It is to simple what like a snowmobile transmission is. Like there's one speed, there's one gear. You push the gas and go.
Yeah.
Right? Like it has intricacies within it, and maybe in its design or in the reticle or in componentry, but it is very plug and play. Once you zero it, there's not a lot of interaction with the optic other than maybe adjusting your brightness
of the illumination if you're using the illumination.
If you even are,
so you kind of can't, once it's set up, once you've zeroed it in, you kind of can't screw it up. You just pick it up and use it, which is very nice. And so
I've said it before, like it would be if all things hit the fan, it would be the one I would take out of the safe and give to the person who has like no experience shooting guns. I'd be like, here you go, put the thing on the thing and pull the thing.
This one's yours.
Yes.
So you've got, gosh, that is such a good point actually, because it's like, well, if you give them a red dot, what are they going to do if the red dot, like, they got to adjust brightness or it turns off, or they put it in night vision mode, now they can't see anything, give them a low power variable, and they're like, what magnification am I on? All this stuff, whatever. So with these new ones, we've got the Spitfire HD Gen 2s. We have a 3X and a 5X. Now, these ones are pretty neat because they're also very short, very compact, and they share mounting platforms with optics like that SPARC Solar that we mentioned earlier, and a lot of other aftermarket mounts out there as well that you can switch it around.
There's a ton of support in terms of mounts. Quick release, like different mounting heights for all the way from, like a suppressor height or like a night vision height to a standard AR height. Like there's all kinds of options for mounts on the market.
Mm-hmm. And when you go to, now also too, I guess if you're not watching, we'll try and explain this as well. These have the same flush adjustments, elevation and windage to make them nice and streamlined. Same low profile kind of battery cap and just body in general. When you go to the 5X, one of the cool things about this one is that obviously we and our engineers knew going into this. Let's say somebody goes to a 5X. Now they're really jumping into the waters of, okay, I've committed to this sort of more intermediate distance optic, right? I know that I've given up some of the ability to engage things closer and quicker. But in this case, because of that, we added on a plate on top to add optics direct mount, like a Venom or a Viper Red Dot, which are our small open top red dots, which is pretty neat. If you don't want to use that, there's just a nice flush plate that goes over top of it. But if you do, you just remove that plate and you can direct mount one to it. And so piggyback style, you have a little 1X or unmagnified red dot option that you can quick switch to. So that's a pretty cool feature there that then offers it some, you almost get like a 1 or 5 optic instead of a 1.25.
Yep. And again, getting that versatility to go back to the speed and acquisition of a dot, but also with simply just lowering your cheek weld, having that magnification available to you. And they do have the AR BDC-4 reticle, I believe, which is very similar to a magnified view of something like you would see in, say, like a Strike Eagle or something like even a Gen 3 1-10, a reticle that has information in it that you can use to put rounds on target, given variables like different distances and wind.
Right.
It's a very usable reticle. It's also just very simple. And like, I think the size profile of them is really what's surprising. When you look at current 3 or 5 power Prism sights on the market, reduce the size for the same optic by about 40 or 50%, and that's what you're looking for here.
Yeah, even the new 5X is considerably shorter than the current 3X. Or now old 3X model. Adam, how do you feel about Prism optics? Because you are probably the biggest low power variable fan I've ever met in my entire life. So you obviously with those have so much variability. That's the V in the name. You have a lot of variability with what you can do. You can set them to 1X, use them like a red dot, and you can bump them up a little bit. Do you see what's a situation where you would find yourself implementing a Prism sight?
That I would use a Prism sight. I mean, I've used the 1-power Prism sight quite a bit. In a niche application in the sport of 3-gun. I mean, the Spitfire AR is legal cheating in the unmagnified division.
The limited class, correct?
Yep, limited class.
Or irons, depending on.
Yep, or irons, depending on what region of the country or era we're talking about. I think one of the things, I really do think that the fixed power Prism scopes are somewhat of a niche or a dated optic segment, especially in modern applications of ARs. These are certainly some of the best ones, or a highly evolved version of it. But I tend to go more towards a variable power scope or a red dot. I can't think of an application that I would choose this over that.
I asked you this because I knew you would say that. Because I appreciate that point of view for what it is.
Well, I don't. I'm offended by it. I mean, the size.
How dare you, sir?
I'm sorry, Adam, but I'm not sorry. I do this for the people. The size of the 3-power is the size of the eyepiece on the Razor Gen II 1-6. So, I think size and weight.
Look at that.
Yep. If you're talking size and weight being important, you can't dispute that fact. Now, I will say your flexibility is gone. You are shooting a 3-power optic.
Yep. Now you could toss on, an offset red dot.
Yep.
Or an offset set irons. But then you're talking about getting yet another sighting system on your rifle.
Yeah. Well, and I think maybe what you were baiting me towards is I would choose, if we could throw offset or tertiary red dots into the mix, I would choose a Prism and a red dot over a red dot with a flip over magnifier.
Okay.
At any juncture. If I had, if those were the choices, I would choose a fixed power.
If we lived
Prism.
in Adam's world.
It's
like Wayne's world.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, why is that? Because I know we kind of brought up magnifiers and said we'd get back into them. So now maybe is the time, because we're kind of in prisms and about to transition into low power variables, but we're bringing up the magnifier because we're talking about the idea of not wanting to necessarily give up that close quarters ability of the AR, while also achieving some level of accuracy at intermediate distances. So this is now where we're getting into multiple ways of doing that. Prism with an offset or piggybacked red dot with a flip-up magnifier, or low power variable.
I'm sorry, I asked the question again.
I don't know if it was a question.
Yeah, that was
I think it was just
what
a statement of where we are in time and space. But
so
talk about the magnifier, though, because we didn't
flip
really
over
get into
magnifiers. I think that's another thing it's holding on. It's still viable. It still plays, but it comes from an older era of optics. And so for a lot of folks, it's kind of a safety blanket. It's kind of it's what they know and what they're used to. And low power variables are kind of the new kid on the block. They're not. That's perception. But we talked about that in a different episode. But I think the perception is that it's simple, but it's two things instead of one, and it mechanically knuckles over back and forth, and when it's folded out of the way to the position that you would use it most of the time, just the red dot for your defensive or whatever close quarters stuff, it's in a very unergonomic and unbalanced spot. You just kind of hung it off the side of the rifle where everything else on the rifle is trim and in line. Now you got this thing hanging off to the side.
Right.
And I would choose a red dot to save bulk. I'm trying to shave bulk off of a rifle if I'm using a red dot. So it adds bulk. So I think, and then on the sales side of the house, usually people who are buying them, they're kind of holding on, or they're forsaking the evolution into a low power variable kind of for invalid reasons. I feel like a lot of the reasons that it carries on have really been replaced with better answers, but certain segments haven't accepted it.
Adam brings this up a lot too, and I think it's a valid point. A lot of people who are current, whether they be a military or law enforcement professional, if you're in the military, the global war on terror has been going on for 20 years. And these types of sighting systems were very popular. And while a lot of those folks transitioned into law enforcement careers or law enforcement training or just a training career, they're comfortable with something like that. And they're going to continue to train what they're comfortable on, right? And evolving into something like a low-power variable, while it might, at its core be faster, it won't be faster or better unless you train with it. And so, like, it's easy to take something that you're not comfortable with and discredit it or, push it aside and be like, see, I'm still better with that. Okay, well, you've used that for 15 years, and you just picked this up today at the demo table and shot it once. If you put the same amount of training into both systems, I think what Adam's getting at is that you would just be, if we were taking away biases or taking away, an unfair amount of time that we've had with one system, and put them both on equal playing fields. That's why a lot of the like speed tests and speed trials between like a holographic or a low power variable, you'll find that there's really not much difference, if any at all. And sometimes the nod goes towards the low power variable.
Blasphemy.
Yeah, right. And so, like I said, if you've put time behind something for a long time, it might be what you're comfortable with.
Right.
And being the company that we are, we offer our customers what they're asking for.
Right.
As long as we have the ability to make that product at the right price and support it and provide a value, on par or better than what we can, like that's what we're gonna do. And we do have customers that ask for that.
For sure.
We do have customers that ask for fixed power prisms. We do have customers that ask for flip over magnifiers, so we continue to evolve in them.
Yeah.
I think the application that still exists for the flip over magnifier red dot combo that is viable and probably hasn't been surpassed yet is passive use of night vision.
Okay.
Through an optic. Now, if you look at the segment of the market that's doing that, or even has night vision, okay, so that's one group, and then of that group, 95% of what they do is with a laser. Not passively through an optic. But if we're talking about that very niche thing of using helmet-mounted night vision passively through an optic, and then you still need some kind of daylight capability on a magnifier, it probably is the better of the not good answers right now for putting all of those things together.
Yeah. But to your point, though, I mean, you talk about shaving bulk off of your rifle. I mean, let's just even look at a small red dot like the SPARC Solar here with a magnifier behind it. That's kind of the size and weight that we're at. That takes up, when you consider the relatively small amount of mounting space you get on the top receiver of an AR, and you're not wanting to mount your optics out on the handguard, really. That's taking up probably most of your space up there. Now you take the Spitfire HD Gen II 5X, you mount one of these little Venoms on top. You didn't take up any more rail space. You really didn't even make it a ton taller. You didn't make it any wider, but you still kind of achieved the same outcome.
Yep.
And really, honestly, even a bit better outcome, because now you have a Prism optic with a more technical reticle inside, a BDC for the 5.56 with holds to 650, wind holds, and you have your close-up red dot. So
your dots at the height that your night vision would need to be anyways.
That's another thing too. Yeah, it is funny though, you bringing up sight height and some of the stuff that you brought up as well with the magnifier. I think red dots have gotten so much better over the years, and they've gotten better because it's hard for people to give up red dots, and they still have their place. Absolutely, I'm not saying that they don't have their place, but for example, magnifiers being put behind red dots. People are like, we love these red dots, but we want to be able to shoot out a little bit further and a little bit more accurately. So somebody developed a magnifier to put behind the red dot. Well, now low power variables are out there, and they kind of achieve something similar, if not better, but a lot of people are still stuck with the magnifiers and the red dot. Same thing goes with people got red dots, and they thought, well, what happens if this thing dies because they're not super efficient yet, or maybe they're not as durable back when they first came out as they are today? And what happens if this thing dies? I still want to have my irons on me, to be able to use those through the optic. Well, then we started really placing this focus and this hyper focus on co-witnessing and whatnot, and now people can't give up co-witnessing. And it's like, and so you're thinking to yourself, well, I can't have extra tall mount. mounting height with my red dot because then I can't coat it into my irons. And it's like, well, how many times have you ever had to use your irons through your red dot, or do you ever anticipate having to use your irons through your red dot? When you have 150,000 hours of battery life, which that's another thing that we made better and better and better. And, and you've got super durable optics, which is another thing we made better and better and better.
The thing, and this always gets me, and I could be wrong. There could be a lot of Jason Bournes out there that do stuff, but like, it's called a quick release mount, so you can get it off the gun quick. So co-witnessing, yeah, it's cool. Like, it's nice to be able to have that backup if for some reason you're in the moment where you're using the gun and the dot stops working. Because, like, I only shoot competition, but I can tell you that before every time the buzzer goes off, I look to make sure the dot's on. So I think that if you're in that mysterious, magical moment where all of a sudden now the dot stopped working, but I can see through the sight, your battery's dead. Or you hit the button and it's off. That's two things. And you can prevent both of those. So, like, now the thing that irons are going to help me with is if I have, like, a catastrophic optic failure, right? The glass is broken and I can't see through it. Backup irons don't help you anyways. So the quick release mount gets it off and out of the way.
That's a fair point. Well, we've sort of we're getting to the point now where we're getting into low power variables. I think we've definitely aired some of our preferences towards low power variables. And what
if we would have started with those, we could have already been done.
Exactly. What I was getting at too is that, I mean, like, red dots have gotten better and better and better. The accessories around them have gotten better and better and better. But now we have these low power variables, and it's like there will always be a place for red dots. And this is going to sound so, like, wishy-washy because I'm like, low power variables are the best, but there's always a place for red dots. And that's another one of those things where it's like, until you've used both, it's hard to explain why, but you know that it is true. But these 1 to 4s, 1 to 6s, 1 to 8s, 1 to 10s, let's talk about these things now, because there are many pros and there are some cons, which we can point out.
Hey, I'm fine admitting the cons.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, first con is the fact that they're big.
They're big.
It depends on what you're comparing them to. If you're talking about your 20-inch AR rifle that you're trying to shoot steel out to 700 on, and you're comparing it to like a 3 to 15 or a 5 to 25, then they're not big.
Right.
But if you're comparing them to a red dot, then they are big.
Well, comparing them to a red dot, they're big. So not only are they bulky, but they take up a lot of space on your gun. Mm-hmm. They require a mount, so you have to buy something usually separate just to even be able to use it.
You got to mount them.
You have to mount them
properly, level.
You have limited eye relief or a specific set eye relief. You have a specific eye box behind the optic. You have a limited field of view. Okay, we've talked about the bad things. Now we're just going to talk about all the good things.
Yep, you pretty much nailed it. Yep.
Sweet.
So all good things from there.
Yeah.
Adam, you love these things.
I do.
Why are they so awesome? What have you been able to what is it that has happened in your shooting life and career where you mentioned earlier, you've proven to yourself that the low power variable is basically like it can do all things for you that a red dot could when it's on 1 power. Now again, the size and weight factor comes into play depending on where you want to fit your rifle and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But in terms of just using it, let's take the size and weight and things out of the equation. You've proven to yourself that on 1 power it can do everything you need it to do, and then you have that ability to go up to the higher powers for intermediate distances. What's up there?
I mean, like I say, I just kind of took it to some of those places where people are like, well, it just doesn't cut it here. Specific shooting schools or types of events where they're just like, no, red dots are king here. I mean, you can try, but they've all failed, and it's kind of like, no, I mean, it's just a gun sight, they're not doing anything magic to it. And then I find that a lot of the naysayers to it are some of these groups, like Reuben alluded to. They've been shooting red dots or holograms for a long time. Mm-hmm. And then, they were running, a something agency or was running a trial. And they're like, all right, well, what about these? And they tried it for a couple days or a couple hours even. And they're like, well, it's not as fast as our holograms. And I was like, well, you've been training for 15 years on a hologram. You ran this for, a couple minutes. and it was the one that somebody else kind of threw on the gun that was like yours and didn't even say. I find that most people who think that a red dot is faster haven't properly set up their
not
optic.
just faster, but there's a lot of things that a low power variable can do. I think I mentioned this a little bit before, but a low power variable will unlock more of the potential of your gun than I think any other optic will.
Because of the fact that it's kind of a jack of all trades.
Is it as fast, or is target acquisition as fast as a red dot in CQ distances? No, but it's probably 80 or 90% as fast,
I get what you're
right?
saying.
So it does 80% of a dot's job. Okay, is it as much precision as a 3 to 15? Well, no, by nature it's not. It's only a 8 power or a 10 power, but therein it does 75% of that optic's job. Mm-hmm. Is the reticle, a trim or 3? No, but it has everything that I need to put rounds on target for what I'm doing. So I think while it might not do anything that specifically as good as one of these, let's compare it to a Prism. It's not as simple as a Prism. It's also not as small, compact, lightweight. However, it still provides me with the ability to do that optics job. So it's like a red dot can't really do the job of a low power variable. And a low power variable might not be able to do a red dot's job as well, but it does it. Mm-hmm. And no other optic in that whole category of everything we've talked about can do all of the jobs. It might not be, it's a jack of all trades, master of none.
Right.
I think also maybe a better articulation of what the answer to your question is, I think to unlock all of the things that an LPVO can do for you, you have to set it up right.
Yeah, and you mentioned that earlier, and I'd like to go into that further because it's very important because a lot of people don't.
A lot of people don't.
And it forever taints their image of what a low power variable
especially
is.
Professional end users, because for the most part, when you talk on the professional side, they're disinterested and dispassionate users of this tool that's given to them. So at most, they're going to bolt it on. Yeah. But there's all these slots on here. Where do they bolt it? They might just pick one and throw it. It doesn't matter as long as it's on top, right? But like in a low power variable compared to a red dot, a low power variable, it is important where this thing ends up on here. There are preferences for red dots, but like it's important that the eyepiece be at the right distance for the stock length that you run. Mm-hmm. It has a very forgiving eye box, but if you put it in a suboptimal place, you're going to be in kind of one of the quadrants of the eye box, and that's going to hinder your experience.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then same thing with the eyepiece. Very few people, I don't know, I would imagine that 70% of low power variable users never touch the diopter.
They just use it however it came out.
Yeah, however it came out of the box, that's how they use it. But that's how you get the true 1 power. When you hear the folks that, well, it's not a true 1, well, you didn't set it up for your eye,
I try and be extremely, I think we all do a pretty good job of being assuming that people don't have bad intentions when they say this isn't a 1 power, right? And I think it's very easy to be like, well, let me show you. I'll show you it is. And I think we all do a pretty good job of being like, okay, well, let me show you. Let me show you, right? One of the things that absolutely see, there I am. I can't even formulate a thought.
It's quite all right.
I'm furious right now. One of the things that drives me crazy is when people say that this isn't a 1 power. Mm-hmm. And it's like, yes, it is. Let's just adjust it right.
It is. Yeah. And one of the things that I think happens so frequently with all optics, not just low power variables, but it's one of the things that, and one of the reasons why I think the 1 power, let's be honest, 1 power is the thing that gets scrutinized the most on low power variables.
Absolutely.
It's almost as though people forget that 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 even exist.
I mean, 1 power is where you're talking about eye box. People are talking about edge to edge. People are talking about true 1.
They never call and say brightness. This doesn't have true 6 power.
Exactly. because everybody bought a low power variable, probably at least even for a second considered a red dot. And then they got the low power variable, and now they're instantly trying to justify their decision and see, well, is it as good as a red dot? And so they go to 1 power first. They haven't maybe messed with the diopter yet. And for whatever reason, everyone's eyes, and this happens with all optics, they go, boom, straight to the edge. They don't even actually look through the optic as though they'd be using it when they were shooting, right down the center. They're not even focusing on the target downrange. None of this stuff is happening. They go straight to the edge. And with any optic that has even a lens in it, which we alluded to when we talked about red dots, which have one lens in it, which can even cause the distortion that you see. It's why holographic sights, again, are so special. There's no lenses that you're actually physically looking through, so there's no image distortion. Now you talk about a traditional rifle scope with many lens elements in it, more than even just the two that you can see on the outside. And, something like the one I always remember is the AMG 624. I think it has like 14 or 15.
I think it has 19 glass elements.
Oh, well, never mind. I just said I remembered it, and
It's
I
a
clearly
lot.
didn't. But it's up
grip.
there. And so a lot of them, these oftentimes have double digits in terms of lens elements. So that's all that many chances for light to be distorted, and it will be. There is no perfect rifle scope that distorts no light. It's physically impossible. But if you look to the edges, that's where it's going to occur. And that, especially if your diopter isn't set right, if you're hand holding it and it's not on a mount and you're not on the gun with a solid cheek weld behind the rifle scope in a consistent location within that eye box, people who hand hold, your hand shake and whatnot, and you're not really in that proper spot. There's all these variables that come into play. And so if that's what happens, that is why you're not going to see it the way that it is intended to be seen. So you got to have it set up properly, again, for eye relief, with that diopter set right, for your eye, not the gunsmith's eye, not your buddy's eye who is trying to compare it to whatever else, to where it will be as close to or perfectly on that one power as possible.
Yeah. When we're at a match and somebody gets a new rifle or somebody is shooting a different optic and they're like, "Hey, check this out," and they pass it to you, it's like, oh, like this is wrong. And it might not even be that off, but like it's off enough where I don't like it.
Yeah.
And then that same thing on my rifle with the stock setup, how I run it, is like, oh, this thing's perfect.
Mm-hmm. And then, too, what I was getting at as well with the whole, like, people's eyes go to the edge thing. It's like, well, have you tried taking it out and shooting it yet? Well, no. And then you go out and shoot it, and you don't really realize it because as soon as you start trying to realize it and consciously think about it, then you kind of screw everything up. But subconsciously, when you are shooting, your eye doesn't even notice anything on the edges. Mm-hmm. Or at least any minute little details that you're picking up when you pull it out and you're focusing on it.
Like, there are shooting schools that teach you to basically make scope shadow happen so that you look through the center of the glass. Like,
oh, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, like, when you're doing any type of shooting, you're not focused on the outside edges. Mm-hmm. I think that kind of thinking goes of, like, distortion. Yeah, maybe it could slow you down on a target transition or something, or maybe it could screw up your PID, but, like, that's, you don't look through the outside edges on purpose.
Mm-hmm. So, anyway, there's our little PSA. We also have a whole podcast on diopters where we talk to one of the optical engineers here. So if you're curious more about that, how to set it just right for you, you can go check out that podcast for sure. But some of the pros, though, other pros around, you mentioned PID. Now, Adam, you deal a lot with military and law enforcement sales. So explain the PID aspect of it. What does PID even stand for those not familiar? And how important it can be to even just, I guess, identify your target.
PID in a law enforcement context or military context is positive identification. So that's them deciding if it's the right thing to shoot at. Is that the guy we're looking for? Is it a threat? Is he holding a phone or a gun or something like that? So as we see LPVOs become more popular, we're seeing them gain more popularity in the law enforcement segment because whereas with a red dot, we have a simple aiming system that isn't giving you any more information. Now we have an aiming system that is also giving us more information. So we can not only place a more precise shot if you had to, but they also can see the target more close up and decide. They can monitor a situation and decide if this person actually needs to get shot or not. And so, and it's not just a rural thing. I mean, it started kind of in rural counties and sheriffs and things like that, where they're like, well, we have some places with long driveways and whatnot, but even in cities, like, at standoff distances at 50 yards, they seeing up close so they can make decisions, especially in 2020 and all the implications that come with an officer involved shooting now, you're seeing a lot more interest in low power variables on patrol rifles because it adds a decision making element to what they're going to do or not do. So, but yeah, we're seeing that more and more all the time as these become more vetted systems. And, it definitely came up through both the military applications of it and the sports shooting applications of it have vetted it. And a lot of folks who came from those communities to law enforcement, they're now bringing it into the law enforcement. Law enforcement, lags behind military and sports shooting, usually in decades, as far as when they're actually going to adopt it.
Right.
But you're seeing that now. We're kind of we're on the dawning edge of that being a common thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy, and then of course we mentioned some of the other things that it shares with the Prism scope too, but a physical reticle inside, always there regardless of a battery. And obviously really no issue in terms of an astigmatism there.
Easier to zero. You have, if you turn a scope up to 6 or 10 power, you're going to get a better zero.
One thing I think is important to note too is that if you were to go out and you were to buy like an entry level LPVO or an entry level dot, the price is going to be very different, right?
Yes.
You're looking at, an entry-level dot being $150 and an entry-level LPVO with a mount being, $300. So like roughly double the price. The same goes for like a premium dot and a premium LPVO. So like your price is, going to be double or so.
Yeah.
Once you include a mount.
Yeah. And that, that is kind of one of the nice things too about when we talked about more of these, again, I'll call them more specialty optics, because you get an LPVO, chances are you're at least going to be able to do what you try to do with it. You get one of these, there may be some things that you then rule out or that you just understand there's some big trade-offs with. But anyway, you can get a premium one of these and maybe some premium accessories and still be well under the cost of a premium low power variable plus amount to go with it. Like the Spitfire HD Gen 2 here, the 5X with that piggybacked red dot on top is a really nice setup. I mean, there's nothing that I would call entry level about that.
No.
But still, your combined cost for such a thing is going to be about half the price of a Razor Gen 2 or certainly less than a Razor Gen 3.
Yes.
So that is kind of one of the things that you do get into. And then, of course, like we mentioned, the fact that there are just more setup procedures. You mentioned some of them, Adam. That's even after it's already been mounted, assuming that you have the levels, the torque wrench, all that stuff to do it. So a little bit more of an involved process, but I think if you are one of those people that got an AR before you necessarily knew what you were going to do with the AR, but you were like, I got to get a sighting system on this thing right away, I can see merits to maybe putting a red dot on it like we talked about at the very beginning. But also, if you wanted to kind of do the old buy once, cry once, and kind of be like, okay, I got something that I can live with for a while, grow into, figure out what I want to do with this gun.
Yeah.
If you get a low power variable, chances are you're not going to find yourself in a scenario where you're like, boy, I wish I got something else. Or boy, do I absolutely need something
and
else.
like I wanted to bring this up to I might end up not being happy that I said this, but I think I'll be happy that I said this. In the competition world, there are divisions, and currently in multi-gun, it's using a rifle, most of the time an AR, a pistol, whether that be a Glock or a 2011, and then a shotgun. Right now, there's two divisions primarily that are really big, and some of the divisions are growing, like Open's getting bigger, but limited division is using an optic like a red dot or a Prism, a one power optic, a non-magnified optic. And currently, like tactical or scoped division, the only difference between those two divisions is that in scoped or tactical division, most guys are going to be using a low power variable, since they can have a magnified optic. In limited division, you're limited to a non-magnified optic. Now, shooting the same shotgun and the same pistol, but changing the rifle, the times are almost always faster with a low power variable. Now, I'm not saying, and this is where I might regret saying this, but I'm not saying that they perfectly replicate what you're going to experience in life. But typically, stage designers will try and put in a mix of close-range targets and long-range targets. Mm-hmm. And if you take an average of all the matches that Adam and I have shot over the years, I can think of very few stages that, unless it was just a shoot house stage where all the distances were CQ distances, I can rarely remember a time where the limited division rifle shooters were winning more than the tactical division. So if you average it out, most of the time in a test of speed and accuracy, people who shoot low power variables are winning more than people who shoot limited.
Yep. And I would jump on that too, because I've shot in tactical division with a red dot before, or when you look at the overall results, I mean, at best you're running with them, and if not, you're giving something up. And if they start to throw in longer range targets in there, you're certainly giving something up on a time basis. You can still hit those targets, but it is more challenging for you.
And you've done it with the Spitfire.
Oh,
You've
absolutely.
hit targets out to what?
Absolutely.
7?
Yep.
Yeah, and that's not to say that you can't do it. I guess what I'm just getting at is dynamic situations are almost always situations where time is a factor. Mm-hmm. Whether that's, concealed carry or using a carbine or something to defend your home. Most of the time, a situation isn't really a situation until we throw time in. Mm-hmm. And so where competition shooting is a really good test of these skills is because time is a very important thing. Mm-hmm. And while accuracy, the PRS guys might say, well, 3-gunners don't need accuracy. It's like, we just have to hit the target. That's true. But most of the times the targets we're shooting are like a realistic type of target that you would be encountering anyways. So if we're looking at which optic or which type of optic works best for an AR or unleashes more of its possibilities or potential, I think I have to say the low power variable does that more of the time, or does all of the things okayer than anything else you can put on it.
Right.
Yeah, and a low power variable, like in some of those applications, where a guy could use like a 1.5 or a 2 power or something, but a red dot shooter only has unmagnified. I mean, that might be, the difference between one miss, it's a game that's decided in hundredths of a second, so your 1 or 2 misses where a guy with a little bit of magnification hit it in the first shot, that you gave up an edge.
Yep, for sure. And that's not to say that there isn't a place for dots. I mean, there is, and there's absolutely a clientele that needs the versatility of a dot, or some of the certain features of a dot. But I think if you're talking about the person who's undecided, right? Like the person who went out and bought an AR because they wanted an AR because somebody told them, hey, you should get an AR while you still can, or something like that, and you're not sure what you want to do with it, I think that there are certain types of optics that are going to allow you to do more than others.
So how about this? I'll toss out a couple of ARs with some applications tied to them, and you guys just like first instinct toss out your preferred optic for that
that's a good
setup.
game.
How about that?
Let's do that.
What do you guys think? Reuben, are you in?
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
Yeah, for sure.
You had me at hello.
He didn't say hello.
New to 3-gun, not sure what division I'm going to go into, but I got an 18-inch AR that my friend told me would be a good idea. What optic should I get?
A Viper PST 1-6.
Same.
All right, and then I'm just going to shoot TAC ops, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, you could shoot a lot of divisions, but
okay,
lots of jumping off points with that.
Sweet. All right, and I got an 11.5-inch first SBR. Super stoked. Going to be my home defense thing. Might be a truck gun. What optic should I put on that?
What does truck gun mean for you?
Oh, truck gun is like.
I mean, it
truck
depends.
Truck gun is like. Oh, like I'm pulling down my driveway and a pack of coyotes trying to attack my dog, or I'm driving down the road in a giant horde of motorcycle gangsters is like trying to run me down. And
my answer to your hypothetical question is the SPARC Solar.
Yes.
That
the
actual
battery life.
Yeah, the actual gun that I carry in my truck all the time has a low power variable on it because it's 300 blackout, and I probably will shoot more critters with it ever than hordes of.
Did you say
people
yours
trying
was
to take my
5.56 or 300
super.
blackout?
Oh,
You didn't say.
I didn't say.
Okay.
Simon didn't say.
Well, I mean, just judging based on you spent the money, you got a nice rifle, you have enough where you spent the $200 tax stamp to SPR it. I'm probably going to say either like a Razor 1-6 or a SPARC Solar.
Okay, cool. All right, we'll do two more. Literally never shot a gun before. Went to my gun store, got whatever 16-inch AR I could find that they still had around. Have no idea what I'm going to do with it or what optic to put on.
How much are they willing to spend?
Oh.
Yeah,
They've never bought an AR before. They're like, they only got it because they were kind of like, I feel like I need to get one. They didn't get the most expensive AR.
Well, I'll explain
16
I'm going to
inches.
give you my answer, but I'm going to explain it too.
All right.
Okay, so I'm going to say a Strike Eagle 1-8.
Okay.
Okay, so here's my reasons. They've never shot an AR. So that tells me that they're not an enthusiast yet. And you don't
Fair.
get excited about something if it sucks. So if you're not an AR enthusiast, this is your first one,
Yes.
and you went and you didn't know what you were going to buy, so you just bought what the guy told you to, you're probably dealing with something that's fairly unrefined, something that's not a high-speed trigger, something that's not, you probably don't have all the whoozy whatsits and bells and whistles on it, right? So my thinking is let's get the most out of it by putting an optic on it that will allow you to coyote hunt with it when your buddy says he wants you to go with. You can go shoot a 3-gun match. You can go take a defensive carbine match with it.
Yeah.
You can also leave it on 1 power and defend your home, right? So,
Sure.
I mean, I think that if you put a dot on a gun like that with a user like that who has a fairly low level of participation into shooting or shooting sports or anything, you might discourage them by putting a dot on it, and they're like, I shot a 6-inch group at 100 yards. They
I
said
can't
this
see
was
it well
more,
enough. Yeah.
this thing isn't accurate. Why didn't I just buy, okay, right? Like, so now you're taking someone who doesn't have the desire or ability or the skill set built up to go and take that out and shoot accurately like Adam can do at
That's a fair
400
point.
yards.
It is a little bit, I think, shocking when you very first. I've gone periods of time where I haven't looked through a red dot in a long time because we've been doing long range stuff, or I've been looking through 1-6s and stuff, and then I look through a red dot, and you bring it up to your eye, and you're like, oh yeah, it looks exactly the same as it did, and just as far away as it did before I pulled the rifle up to my eye. So like, you gotta get used to it again. You're like, I can't really see that well. I'm gonna just put the red dot where I think I should.
Yeah.
I'm
gonna say a quick something about that. When I got my first AR, I thought ARs were magical. And like it was the key word. It was like what all the cool kids were buying. And so I bought one and I put a red dot on it. I took it to the range. I had 300 rounds of ammo with me, not high quality ammo, by the way. And I had 2 30-round magazines, and I started shooting it, and I was like, this thing sucks. Like, I mean, I probably didn't know what distance I was supposed to zero it at. I'm talking like this is 14 plus years ago at least.
Yeah.
But like, I had no idea what to expect, and I started shooting, and I'm like, this takes work.
Yeah.
Right? So like, if I'm thinking of what that user should buy,
missiles.
I'm thinking of what that user should buy. They at least got to be able to see what they're doing.
For sure. Adam, you didn't answer this one yet.
Just so that I, for the most part, agree with Reuben, but just so we have a different answer, I would go with a red dot, like the SPARC Solar or a Crossfire or something like that, because I ran into a lot of customers like that the cost of scope plus mount was a hard stop. It's just out of their budget. So again, you can get into most of our red dots for a few $100.
Yeah.
And it's ready to go. Also, I would go from it kind of from the standpoint of hoping that they go out and want to shoot it, try and they want to do like Call of Duty or whatever, they want to shoot fast and whatnot, or maybe take some of the cool guy classes and hope that maybe having the cool gun that they see on TV or in the video games inspires them to kind of dive into it further. And when they dive into it further, they're going to make all kinds of revised decisions, but hoping that the kind of having that quintessential AR with a red dot setup kind of gets them into shooting fast. Because I was that guy too. When I bought mine, I knew that it wasn't the right thing for 3-gun, but I wanted to buy an M4 looking gun because that would be cool.
Totally.
And I bought, a red dot. And man, I got on the LPVO train really quick when I tried to shoot some 200 and 300 yard targets with a red dot.
Dude,
To be clear, my first AR didn't suck. I just sucked at shooting it.
Right.
Me as well.
Oh, we all knew that.
Second AR, awesome.
I still have an A2 carry handle sight that I tell myself I'm going to put on something because I think it's awesome, and it's was always my childhood dream to have a gun that looked like that with that silhouette. And every time I get an AR, I'm like, put an optic on it.
Yeah.
So it has yet to see anything yet. I wanted to say the Spitfire 5X with a piggybacked red dot on top, but it's not intuitive enough for somebody who's new. Because then you're going to have to tell them, well, you have to sight in both optics. Plus, you're going to have to buy 2 optics. Plus, this one's going to have to be mounted perfectly right here for your eye relief. The other one, don't worry about the eye relief. It's too much at once, even though I think it'd be a sweet setup for
You don't know what you don't know.
Once
That's
it
all
was
boils
already
down
set
to,
up,
I think
it'd be pretty sweet once they had it. Okay, last one, and then we'll be done. It is a 10-inch ish or whatever length you want it to be, but it's a 9mm PCC.
Yeah. I've read your mind on that.
I was hoping you'd read my mind on that.
I don't know what Adam's mind was saying. I was mostly hearing Reuben yelling at me.
Yeah, I was saying say Tavor.
This is about ARs. So
sorry, Adam.
So on a 10-inch 9mm, I'll just tell you.
I don't know if 10 inches is even a good length for it.
Yeah, it is.
Is
Yeah.
it?
I have two
in my head.
I'll tell you because I have a 10-inch 9mm in the safe and it has a SPARC Solar on it.
Mine is my 9mm carbine is a 4-inch and it just has a big suppressor sticking underneath.
Nice.
Heck yeah.
Actually, it doesn't have a SPARC Solar on it anymore. It has a UH1 Gen II.
Okay.
I think that I'm not gonna come out and just say and name some arbitrary distance where I think 9mm is effective to. I'll tell you that I shoot that gun to around 100 yards. That's my kind of.
Which optic was it? Sorry.
A UH1 Gen II.
I like that.
I think it's the closest thing I have to I don't know what would look like a. It's suppressed. It's small. It's short.
You talking about that Kalashnikov one?
No, it's an AR. But yeah, so I kind of like the short 9mm carbines. I like that world. It's a cool place.
UH1 Gen 2. It's like a heads-up display.
Yeah,
Put the target in the red ring of death and pull the trigger, and you're gonna hit it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what I have, and that's probably what I'd recommend.
What are you putting on it, Adam?
Razor Red Dot 6 MOA. That's what.
That's
I have
a great choice for competition, I think.
Yeah, and for me, that's really all I use them for.
Open top, nice and small.
Yeah. Yep.
Good
really.
field of view, nothing in your way really. It's just like a red dot floating there.
The best window presentation of our open emitter red dots. Easy battery access. The 6 MOA presents cleaner than a 3 MOA. I'm not shooting it outside of pistol distances, and I want it to be as nimble as possible. So yeah, for anything else, I would be using a different rifle. So it's a pretty purpose-built setup for me.
I like it. Good choices. All right. I think that'll do it. Was there any other last calls? Adam, you said you were really upset about the fact that you didn't get one yesterday when we tried take 1 of this. Take 2.
All right, so last call, especially on red dots, but pretty much any of these optics. Whatever illumination setting you're on right now, turn it down to. And just play with that for a little bit.
That's a good last call.
That is.
It's going to open your eyes.
It's just very final and very just...
If you're the kind of person who, in the dead of night, as you're in bed, when you turn your phone on in front of your face, after your eyes have adjusted to the nighttime for many hours, and you crank the brightness all the way up and you just wreck your retina, then maybe you don't need to turn it down. But if you're like the rest of us who, when they turn that phone on in front of their face at night and you actually turn the brightness down, then you should definitely turn that brightness down. I think it'd be a good idea.
Give it a try.
Yeah. All right.
I don't remember what mine was yesterday, so...
Just going to say pass, the old euchre,
Sure.
Okay.
That's fine. Yeah, I said what I needed to say.
All right. We'll pass
Mic
on.
drop.
Pass on to the dealer. I'll call Trump of Spades. So with that being said, hopefully for those of you out there, if you're sort of arbitrating over which optic to get for your AR, hopefully this helped. If not, or if you have other questions, something that we didn't address, as usual, just hit us up on Instagram in the comments for this episode when we post it up, or on YouTube if you're watching. So thank you, as usual, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye for now.
All right, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Vortex Nation podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Hit that subscribe button so you can always stay up to date on the latest happenings over here at the Vortex Nation podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at Vortex Nation Podcast. Again, everybody, thanks, and happy hunting and shooting. We appreciate it. Have a good one.